Hi everyone. On Sunday, May 15th, the Communist Party flagship journal Qiushi published an article by Xi Jinping titled Correctly Understanding and Grasping the Major Theoretical and Practical Issues of China's Development. If you're interested in Xi's economic vision and priorities, then I'd highly encourage you to read the article. The links are in the video description. For background, the content of this article comes from Xi's talk at the Central Economic World Conference back in December. Convened by the Central Committee and the State Council, the annual Central Economic World Conference is the top economic policy planning conference in China. It brings together policymakers from across the nation, including at central and provincial levels, and it sets the economic policy direction for China in the following year, so that is this year. I think this article by Xi is worthwhile for a number of reasons. So the first reason is that its content. It outlines Xi's priorities and gives us insights into what may be prioritized during Xi's potential third term in office come the 20th Party Congress later this year. The second reason is to do with timing and politics. China's economy is encountering headwinds, as is Xi's economic policy from within the party. And we're at the last stretch before the 20th Party Congress, so a lot of political jostling happening as we speak. People read a lot into the timing of publications and recent speeches by Xi vis-a-vis, say, Li Keqiang, and try to figure out the changing power dynamics behind the scene. Wall Street Journal, for example, published an article about a week ago that's titled China's Forgotten Premier Steps Out of Xi's Shadow as Economic Fixer. So the article's thesis is that Li is re-emerging as a counterbalancing force to Xi due to Xi's failed economic policies. And the article quotes information from people close to decision making. Anyway, this is a little off topic, but I just want to say that I think we should be skeptical of these claims of what is happening in elite politics and think about why these people close to decision making are actually talking to the Wall Street Journal. Essentially, what do the storytellers want to tell us and why they want to tell us that story? Okay, anyway, so in any case, if Xi is making a retreat on economic policy, I think it's tactical rather than a shift in the underlying priorities. And this is because Xi's economic policy is intertwined with his political ideology, and you just can't have one without the other. So, and the publication of the Qiushi article that we're talking about illustrates that Xi's economic priorities have not really changed. So what does the article say? Well, Xi addresses 5 issues. 1, common prosperity. 2, capital. 3, primary products. 4, risks. 5, carbon. The ordering of these issues tells us about their relative importance for Xi. So after first launching the idea of common prosperity in August last year, we've seen little mention of the idea by party state media. Some China watchers thought it was stillborn, the idea, and consigned it to dustbins. So it's somewhat surprising that Xi put it first among his economic issues. So it tells us that the idea still has currency. Common prosperity. Okay, so what's the problem? In Xi's words, so I'll quote, "In the past, we were egalitarian at the low income level. After the reform and opening up, some regions and some people became rich first, and the income gap gradually widened. The improper accumulation of some wealth has brought risks and challenges to the healthy operation of the economy and society." So, okay, so Xi is linking China's current economic troubles with income and wealth inequality accumulated from the reform and opening up period. And he nods to the egalitarian past, right? So before that period. But what does a path to common prosperity look like? Xi answers that question as well, albeit vaguely. So she says that they're still exploring this path of how to get there, but achieving common prosperity will be a long-term historical process. So it's not just overnight or short-term. So for Xi, it's about not only making the cake bigger, but how to divide the cake well. And I think the latter has displaced the former as the most important thing. How to divide the cake well, right? Finding a good balance between growth on the one hand and distribution on the other through reasonable institutional arrangements. So he goes on to talk about employment and real versus virtual / financial economy, institutions and welfare and etc. But I think you get the message, right? So the central message is that growth alone is no longer the priority, but it's about fair distribution of that growth. And to make it fairer, the role of the government must expand. The role of the state in the economy and the balance between, say, efficiency and equality are always subject to debate, right? But I think the problem is China's superstructure, where the party state is not counterbalanced by other social forces, as you do, say, in democracies. So there is very little that an average citizen or investor can do to resist the power of the state. And we've seen it again and again in the history of the Communist Party, how one-mindedness and echo chamber leads to disaster. So at the very least, we should be highly aware that these policies pursued with good intentions, and indeed I agree that common prosperity is a good intention, can often lead to poor outcomes. The second issue that Xi looks at is capital, how it behaves in today's day and age, how to harness it, and how to regulate it. He starts by asserting that the goal of capital is the same whether it's under the capitalist or socialist system, and that is the maximization of profit. For Xi, the problem is not the presence of capital per se. The Communist Party already accepts that capital will exist under its system, but rather the lack of adequate supervision that has allowed capital, and I'll quote from Xi, to expand in a disorderly way, manipulate the market, and make huge profits. Right? So it's not capital per se, but how to regulate them. Okay. The solution for Xi is to set up a traffic light system. Since all roads need traffic lights to avoid crashes and improve efficiency, then the same logic should apply to how the capital operates. And this apparently will stop capital from exploiting, say, consumers, for example. And the regulatory system is that traffic light system. Xi's crackdown on tech, for example, is an example of this regulation of capital. And the question of how to regulate big business and tech is something that many countries around the world are grappling with. It's not a China-only problem. And I think, in short, the message is that capital in China's socialist market system needs to serve the aim of the state. It can no longer freely operate, or relatively freely operate, like the preceding decades, but now it needs to be under tighter supervision. Again, this is an argument for increasing the role of state. Going on to the third issue, the third issue for Xi is guaranteeing the supply of primary products, such as food, raw material, and energy. Right. So for Xi, this is a strategic issue. He wants China to have a high degree of self-sufficiency in producing primary products, with a big role for state-owned enterprises in, say, the energy sector. He particularly emphasized the need for food security. And I'll quote from him, "Chinese people's rice bowls should be firmly in their hands at all times, and our rice bowls should mainly contain Chinese grains." So on the raw products that sustain a people and on which the physical economy is built, Xi wants to move China towards more self-sufficiency. And that's not surprising, given the increasing unstable global environment, climate change, wars, geopolitical competition, supply chain problems, etc., etc. The fourth issue that Xi writes about is major risks, right? How to prevent them and how to resolve them. Here she identifies a number of challenges for China's financial system. Right. The first challenge is the accumulation of risks from the past. So we're talking about shadow banking, digital finance, etc. So in Xi's view, like these are risks that they've dealt with, but the effects are still lingering today, so they need to watch out. The second is regulatory capacity and institutional deficiencies. That is, the state doesn't have enough capacity and institutional power to reinforce the rules and oversee, monitor, and address these risks. And the third challenge is irresponsible behavior by borrowers, leading to excessive leverage and exposure to risk. So here we're talking mainly about large Chinese companies that are borrowing a lot of money and investing in high-risk projects, and also local governments. The fourth is the collusion and corruption between officials and businessmen. So we're talking about the marriage between big money on the one hand and the bureaucracy on the other hand. Okay, and the final one is economic cycle. So when all these risks are apparent in the system and then you have an economic slowdown, then it's a perfect storm for some kind of systemic event. So here she particularly mentions real estate as a sector that faces risk and needs regulatory attention, and that's not surprising given what we know about China's real estate sector. Okay, moving on to the final issue. The final issue is carbon. Carbon neutralization is important for promoting what the Chinese Party state called high quality development. Here she scolds officials for taking measures that are short-sighted. So these are measures, say, cutting off power in order to meet carbon reduction targets. And he says the adjustment of the energy structure and industrial system is not something that can be accomplished overnight. It will happen actually gradually, and only when the traditional energy source can be replaced by safe and reliable alternatives, and that the right way to go about it isn't to be short-sighted and affect social economic development. So not taking these measures that make figure looks good, especially if they hurt the economy and as well as the day-to-day living of the people. So, okay, there you have it. Xi's views on the 5 priority economic issues at the moment, and all in all, we see that the priority is no longer on growth alone. As you had it in the Reform and Opening Era, there was a particular focus on growth, right? So the thinking is that the cake is big enough. We need to grow the cake, but the most important thing is to divide the cake well. How to cut the cake up instead of keep making it bigger. And indeed, here rises the central question, and that is the role of the state. And it appears that she thinks that the state can make everything right. Okay, thanks for watching and have a good day.